Today we're doing things a little bit differently. In the ZTT Discord server, we post 4 gaming PC builds that our community members submitted every single day, and I've honestly been feeling a little guilty for not putting a bigger spotlight on some of these creations. So I'm gonna start remaking your gaming PCs, and I'll give you some thoughts on how you could have done things a bit differently. The PC we're building today was submitted by Tubers93, and we're obviously starting off with this one because it's a beautiful, all aesthetic white NZXT build, which is of course my favorite, but there are some choices in here that are certainly questionable.
The first one is definitely being the CPU, and for whatever reason, Tubers93 went with an Intel i5 14500. Honestly, I don't even think that sequence of numbers has ever come out of my mouth until this project started. The 14500 was never on my radar, and the reason is pretty clear. It's on Intel's 14th generation and the LGA 1700 socket. So as we know, this is the last generation of this socket because the new series of CPUs went to LGA 1851. This means that there's essentially no upgrade path for this CPU unless you wanted to go with a 14th gen i7 or i9, but most people aren't going to do that right after buying this i5. If you compare that to AM5, that socket is supposed to last through the year 2027 and most likely even further than that, as we're seeing with AM4. On the flip side though, the 14500 does have more total cores and threads, and if you look up some CPU benchmarks, you'll actually see that the 14500 can score a bit higher for both single core and multi-core performance. I guess that kind of makes sense as a selling point to why someone would buy these, but the overall platform of AM5, trust of Ryzen, and lack of trust with Intel right now in 2024 would still be enough for me to choose the 7600X instead, personally. What I'd also choose is the sponsor of today's video, which is the Corsair K70 Pro TKL Hall Effect gaming keyboard. This is the type of board that's for PC gamers that want that super crispy Hall Effect movement advantage to stop the Black Ops 6 dolphin divers, but without breaking the bank. For what you're getting, the K70 Pro TKL is actually priced pretty well, and when peripheral gods like Bad C Tech say it's better than expected, you know it's the real deal. The K70 Pro TKL rocks rapid fire pressure sensitive switches. These are pre-lubed Corsair MGX hyperdrive magnetic switches, and it even has these little unique indicator lights next to the volume dial, which I definitely appreciate. Each key has an adjustable actuation point, and with an 8K polling rate, this total package is pretty tough to beat. You can check out the K70 Pro TKL with the link down in the description and in the pinned comment, and big thanks again to Corsair for sponsoring this video. Moving on, we get to the motherboard, and this is the Asus TUF Gaming B760 Wi-Fi, and this was around $160. Honestly, this board has some decent features, as you can see over here, and I don't really have a problem with it, so let's move on to the RAM. This is a Corsair Vengeance RGB 2x16GB 6000 MHz kit, and I absolutely do not have a problem with this choice either, and I've even personally used this kit a bunch already. Now, the SSD is a bit questionable though, because I never spend the money on these Samsung models, but I understand that a lot of people do, and it's perfectly fine since we can do what we want in the world of PC building. The SSD that Tubers had listed on the Discord post was a Samsung 970 EVO 1TB, but whenever I was purchasing these parts online, I found the 970 EVO Plus for a better price. I know I'm trying to copy this guy's build part by part, but when a part is clearly better and cheaper, it's just a no-brainer pick. I can't help myself. I will, however, say that there's a good chance that this pricing wasn't available during his purchase process, so I'm definitely not going to dock him a point or anything for this one. Regardless of the Samsung model though, I personally don't ever like paying closer to this $150 mark for just a 1TB drive. I mean, this is insanely more expensive than a typical mid-ranged NVMe like the Team Group MP44L, and I much rather spend all that extra money on performance-related components like the CPU and GPU. I mean, you can even get double the amount of storage with a mid-range drive at a cheaper price. Most people, especially just gamers, definitely do not need all of that with the Samsung SSDs. That's why you rarely see me use them, if at all. Now, some things that you have seen me use often is the MSI Mag A650BM power supply paired up with the Asia Horse 16-gauge white cable extensions. The PSU that Tubers actually used was an all-white Thermalright TG650, but that wasn't available on any store that I was looking at, so I had to swap it out. I do like how his build turned out aesthetically with these white cables, but this was the closest that I could mimic that, and honestly, we all know that extensions look just a touch bit better anyway. And speaking of aesthetics, while we're here, this was honestly one of the main reasons I selected his build, and specifically because of the NZXT H5 Flow RGB case with a few extra NZXT fans to go along with it. This H5 Flow is the 2023 version that only cost $80, which still is actually not that bad. But the only thing I dislike about it is the rear fan not being RGB. The two front fans are RGB, and I always hate when case manufacturers cheap out on the rear one, and Tubers decided to actually just leave it the way it is. On top of that, and literally up top in the build, he also added these Duo 140mm fans, but here's where the RGB gets a little funky. Whenever I'm planning an aesthetic build, I always try to keep my RGB products the same, volume. Not just because it makes the software easier to use, which it definitely does, but because I think it looks way better when they're all in sync and looking similar. In this build, we'll have both traditional fan blade RGB fans as well as ring RGB fans, and in my opinion, it just doesn't look that great. We have the two ring fans up top, along with the ring fan on the NZXT T120 CPU cooler, but then the two front fans don't have a ring, and the blades of the fan are what's lit up. Now, obviously, we are talking about first world problems here, but this is the area that I would have cleaned up a bit just to make it look a little bit better. Either way, the aesthetics are still pretty great with this part selection, but we gotta swap back over to performance for the final component. This graphics card is one that I honestly didn't even know existed, and at first, I thought I made a big mistake by not using it sooner. This is the Gigabyte RTX 4060 Eagle OC Ice, and I've always hated the gray and 3 different shades of blue Eagle cards, but this Eagle Ice version is on a whole new level. At least I thought so. I mean, every angle from this card looks incredible, all except for the side profile, which is what you see when it's installed into the motherboard. I couldn't really notice it from the dark and angled pictures in Discord at a quick glance, but in real life, the exposed copper heat pipe devastates the entire aesthetics of this card. It's super frustrating. I am 100% aware that this is nitpicking, but I absolutely do not like the looks of this. I would have much preferred to vertically mount this GPU to hide that ugly pipe. All in all, here's what the final parts list is looking like, and here's where I would have made some changes as well. I'm not exactly sure what tubers paid back in August 2024, but as of right now, without any deals, this is slightly over $1,250. Aesthetically, that price definitely matches up, but in terms of performance, an i5 14500 and RTX 4060 for $1,250 is not hitting the mark. With a slight adjustment towards performance, we could have boosted this up to a 1440p PC with a GPU like the RX 7700 XT or possibly even the 7800 XT. If I were helping somebody plan a build like this, I would have slashed that SSD price to put it more towards the GPU, and I would have also went with AM5 to lower the cost of the CPU and motherboard for similar performance, and again, putting that money towards a better graphics card. I know some of you would recommend away from the NZXT parts as well, but I personally, of course, don't have a problem with that, although I would have cleaned up and matched those RGB fans just a bit better, like I said. But now let's jump into the performance real quickly to see how it did. I didn't get a chance to take this PC home with me and daily drive it, unfortunately, but good thing we got Sam here with a full 20 game benchmarking chart, and here are the results. As you can see, we're not talking about poor performance here. The 14500 and 4060 can still dominate in 1080p with high to ultra settings in pretty much every game. This is another friendly reminder that even if we go with slightly off meta parts, new and mid-ranged hardware like this is still performing really well. The main reason we don't use them more often though is usually just around the price. Overall, I honestly don't think that tubers did too bad here, and I appreciate the excuse of using some hardware that I probably would have never touched otherwise. At the end of the day, this build is rocking some clean and minimal all-white NZXT aesthetics and some solid 1080p high to ultra performance, and I think most people would actually be happy with a build like this compared to something else. Be sure to let me know what you thought of the tubers build down in the comment section, and if you want to see a more optimized way of putting together a $1,250 build that I designed, then that video is on the screen right now.